our next speaker, who is Paul van der Cingel. Paul is going to be talking on the simplicity on the other side of complexity, applying network literacy in education on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And Paul is an economist and specializes in teaching bachelor undergrads in journalism at the School of Media in the Netherlands. And Paul, I see your slides. You ready to go?
I'm ready to go.
Great. Thank
Are you?
Yes.
All right, let's go. Thank you for having me here. Yes, I'm trying to talk tonight. I'm trying to talk tonight about the simplicity, and I hope at the end of the presentation that we will discover that we will be on the right side of complexity with our simple movements. I got my inspiration from this quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes, and my idea is, that much of education that we do, whether it's in, high schools or university education, is kind of based on the wrong side of complexity, which is, the analytical approach that we discussed earlier on with earlier talks, that try to, oversimplify the problems in society. For example, with the biases that you see here in the left hand of the table, like the reductive fallacy. We are trying to get to the right side of the table, the right hand side, I should say correctly, which is, trying to convey simple things, but doing justice to complexity at the same time. So how do we, embed in our education some kind of ideas on how to do that, how to really do an outreach to students or young children to talk and teach complexity in a simple way, but doing justice to complexity. I hope that the resource that I'm going to show you, that I developed with a couple of network consultants, is on the right side of complexity. We'll see about that. This is a network effort. I'm here on my own in this symposium, but the resource that we developed was a collaborative effort with Pedro Portela. He's a network consultant in Portugal, and he collaborated with me in making this version of the resource that I'm going to show you just in a moment. And on the right-hand side, we see June Holly, which is a long-time, very experienced network consultant and co-founder of the Network Weaver community, which is a community of network consultants, mostly in the US, but also internationally. And you see Pedro in the left-hand area of the network. So it's a collaborative effort. The context that I chose to use this resource in was the context of the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. Maybe some of you have some kind of experience in their educational context with the SDGs in their schools or universities. There's a lot of schools and universities worldwide that are kind of adopting these SDGs in their curriculum in some kind of way. And that could be, that could be kind of a magnet for us to see where complex problems are, emerging in education. And we can use that kind of context to help students and teachers with network literacy. So this is the context. And as I said earlier, this is, we can see schools using those SDGs in primary and secondary education all over the world, like this one here in Africa, but we can see them also in universities. This is a staircase in my university in the Netherlands. It's a real staircase, so it's not photoshopped. You can really step on these SDGs and go up and down. That's for illustration. This is a quote from a course manual for students, third years in the bachelor program, where they, you can read that they have to kind of choose as a group, choose a complex problem. So it's a problem that's multi-stakeholder. There's a lot of dynamics involved. There's a lot of interconnections between the stakeholders, and they should also link that to the SDGs. So they have to kind of navigate in complexity in an SDG context. And these are third years bachelors, so these are students 18 to 21 years old. Well, when we do that, we choose to kind of choose the SDGs as a context for our education. That means that we also kind of inherently use complexity in the education. We can kind of adopt complex problems automatically because these SDGs, they are presented, as 17 separated SDGs. They're interconnected. And there's also quite some research in how these SDGs connect with each other on the level of the targets that the SDGs try to achieve, but also on the level of the underlying dynamic problems that persist, in preventing us from achieving those SDGs. So here's kind of a visual of interconnections between a couple of these SDGs as an illustration. This is one of the earlier research papers, 2015. It was published showing us a kind of a network where the targets of the 17 SDGs are analyzed and synthesized again in a network. So we know when we choose the SDGs as a kind of context for our education, we know that we kind of adopt complexity along with it. And there's also interconnectedness in a kind of system map way. There's all kind of system dynamic loops, feedback loops, and feed-forward loops. And this is also just an example from one element of one SDGs, SDGs 6.3. So it's just a system map from the one of the 17 SDGs showing us an enormous level of complexity. And we are kind of confronting students with that. So I think it's only logical that we, kind of are obliged to teach our students something about how to deal with those complex problems. We are obliged to do that because there's potential pitfalls when we don't do that. When we kind of do our teaching and education in the way that we are used to do it. We put students kind of in front of the dragons of inaction, which is a very nice website. You can click on that later on. You come to the Dragons of Inaction website, where there's all kinds of cognitive biases showing us that when facing a complex problem, a lot of people are inclined to do nothing. So it's the idea of this is too much, it's overwhelming, it's kind of approved by intimidation. We don't want students to face that, so we have to teach them how to deal with that. Another reaction could be oversimplifying. Well, we discussed that earlier. Then we're on the wrong side of complexity. And the third pitfall could be, if we don't adjust our educational methods, that students will be grasping for some kind of control that they don't have. For example, they want to overplan the projects and they want to exactly predict what kind of outcome there should be. And teachers who want to have some kind of exact outcome or solution, which cannot be done here. It's not a puzzle. It's more like a game that you play. So there's, I think, a lot of literature already recognizing the importance of some kind of network literacy in education. I mentioned here two examples which are fairly popular. I think especially Rayworth with donut economy. A lot of information on the importance of networks and system thinking. Another interesting book is from, I show here, is Roland Kuipers, on specifically on the SDG targets on climate change. I think it's the first book that I read that had a special chapter on network literacy, which I found, very interesting, because well, I think that's the concept, that NetSciEd invented. So it ended up, in a book like this. It's very pretty cool to see. So that's a good first step, I think. Good first step to, raise awareness in these literature books for the importance of network literacy in education. But how do we implement that? And what I'm going to show you in the rest of this presentation is a very simple resource in which we try to engage the students and prevent the pitfalls that we described earlier. And one of the things that in this tool is fairly important is using network visualization. So the concept maps that we saw earlier in talks today, what we see here with the students from journalism, very proud of their concept map. We use them as a kind of stakeholder mapping exercise, and there's a lot of insights they can learn from that, even in a non-technical way. It's learning them a lot about clustering, diversity within clusters, multi-perspectives on problems, identifying hubs or key stakeholders as they mentioned them. Fostering forward thinking, kind of future thinking, making what-if scenarios, and trying to find some leverage points where they could, try to design some action to change the network. For example, to bring groups together and to see what happens if they could bring those groups together, see what happens and what change they can make in the problem. So. Having done that for a couple of years, and also described something about those network maps in the article in the network literacy book that Catherine mentioned after the break, I came up with some idea of just very simply writing down in a concise and simple way some kind of reflections on how to act as a student or change agent in a complex situation. And I shared those cards with Pedro, and he said, well, we could make some kind of flip cards. So we could make cards that are two-sided, with one side in the green, is the do, and the red side, you flip it over, is the don't. So it's a do and don't kind of card set. And of course, we try to build that on all kinds of insights, both from science, which I call, evidence-based practice, but also, I think, very important, based on experience, which is, I think, the opposite, practice-based evidence. So the ideas from the network consultants we found equally important as the ideas from network science. So hopefully, that would bring us to the other side of complexity while remaining pretty simple. So I give you two examples of cards. This is still work in progress, so this is kind of the layout for version 2, but we're still working on that. And we have the green side and the red side for both, for the cards. So this is the first one. In the red, so it's a don't. It's telling students, but also telling practitioners, to slow down before they face a problem. So don't rush in, but this is a don't card. So the don't is rush in head over heels. That's what you shouldn't do that. Because if you do that in a complex situation, there's all kinds of unintended consequences waiting for you to happen. So it's better to slow down at first in order to accelerate later. So this is the flip card. Instead of, rushing in, just get a sense of what is going on at this moment. So who are the stakeholders, that we can identify? And how are they related to each other? So could we make some kind of a stakeholder network? How can we use that network visualization in a way that gives us new insights in the problem? So this is the card where we advise students to slow down first instead of rushing in. So here's the kind of the reflection side of the cards from network science, the perspectives. You see a lot of network science topics that are from the basis of these very simple advices to students. Learn about network topology is kind of what you are doing, trying to make some network visualization. Triadic closure, is kind of the equivalent of the network practice that you see on the right-hand bottom of the table. Those close by form a tie. That's kind of a slogan from network practitioners, which is kind of the same as the triadic closure in network science. So we try to use kind of insights from both perspectives and try to condense that into some kind of a card advice. A second example, again, this is a don't. This is the idea that in order to make some kind of large impact, you need to have a large input. So it's a kind of proportionality idea that remains with a lot of project managers in the field, but also with students who are trained as classical project management students. The idea that there's some kind of linearity, and for you to make a big change, you have to create a big project with large inputs. That is the don'ts. Well, of course, you can kind of guess what will be on the green side. So here's the idea, really the network idea, that you have some kind of butterfly effect. A small change, can easily amplify in the network and get a very large impact. So it's kind of disproportionality that makes the networks really attractive for change agents, and for them to see that and to try to do that, make some kind of small change in a stakeholder network as a student, and see that can create a lot of impact. That's really empowering for students to experience. So here are the underlying network science insights. All the research that is done on contagion and spreading, or cascading effects, phase transitions, we talked about that earlier. In the network practice, there's also a lot of slogans and a lot of themes that really kind of mirror these scientific insights. We have, of course, in social media, we have the idea of influencers that can create viral effects in media. We have companies that publish about 3% rule. 3% of the employees in the company can create a lot of impact within the total company culture. And June Holly, the Network Weaver, co-founder of the Network Weaver website, she talks about twosies, which is simply her word for collaboration of two people. Well, that's the smallest you can get. A collaboration of two people that can create a lot of impact. So does this resource going to help students, trying to bypass the pitfalls that we discussed? I think it could help. And I experienced in a lot of cases where I use these cards that they could help, because they could empower the students. So bypassing the idea of the dragons of inaction. The problem is overwhelmingly big and it's very complex, and refraining students from taking action. Well, this could empower students to take actual action. It could also prevent them from oversimplifying, because it promotes the network visualization tools, and it kind of switches the mode in the control idea, because I think students can get more control but not on the outcome of the process, but more on the process itself. So it kind of switches the perspective on the control issue, which could be also, very comforting for students, but also for practitioners to experience that. I showed you the cars. I'm really interested in if there's any more questions or ideas or suggestions. I think we have still time for that. I didn't see Massimo waving and saying I had to. My time was up, so let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Let's give our speaker applause. Thank you very much. And you are actually right on time, so maybe we have time for a quick question or maybe two quick questions.
Can I ask a question?
Sure,
Sure,
Hiroki.
yeah.
Thank you very much, Paul. So I would like to hear a little bit more about the process you used to come up with that actual content of the flip cards. How did you come up with those messages?
Well, of course, by reading your book first, but now it was not kind of a scientific kind of process. So I think it's the process of being a kind of a practitioner, both as a teacher and as a consultant, and then reading a lot of blogs and other stuff, kind of in the popular way, and then going back to scientific articles and then saying, well, how do these mirror each other? And when I get the feeling that there's some kind of same ideas, the consultant slogans and the scientific articles, when they match, that's the one that I think, well, I'm going to use that and then see how it works. But it's also a lot of just doing that and seeing how students react to that. And what, for example, with the empowerment of students, that was simply a discussion in a student group where students were saying, well, we feel a lot of stress because we feel that we have to solve the problem. And I just laid down everything and I said, well, we have to discuss this now because you cannot solve this complex problem. But then there was a discussion. What should we do then? Because we have to get our grades and we have to get we have to pass our tests. What should we do? And then the students came up with their own answer. And one of the students said, I think we don't have to solve the problem, but we have to create value. And that was a very spot-on remark, which that taught us a lot. It taught me also a lot because it helped me kind of create the slogans that I used on these cards. So it's also feedback from students and discussions with students and seeing what works.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Are there anybody else have one more quick question? Okay.
These this what was the Network Weaver site?
Yeah.
Is this does this have the flip cards and things that you're talking about on it, or is this separate from that? What you're talking about?
June, let me see.
Is there a place that, and I guess what I'm asking is there a place where we can find the work that you're doing?
I think the first version is on the Network Weaver website with the resources. It's a free resource. A lot of the resources are actually free. So there's kind of a web shop, but you don't have to pay. And the first version is already in the resource on the website. And the second version, well, when it's done, Pedro and I will upload it to June, and she will put it on the website over there. So it's networkweaver.com.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Paul.